The Alpha King thought she was human until she saved him from silver bullets. "I told you, Luke, I'm just a baker." Heather's voice shook, though her grip on the iron skillet did not. Luke Prado, Alpha King of the Northern Territories, bled out on her kitchen linoleum. His golden eyes, usually so commanding, were clouded with pain and disbelief. "Humans," he rasped, "don't shatter silver with their bare hands, Heather." The door to the bakery splintered inward. The scent of ozone and wet dog flooded the room. Heather sighed, tossing the skillet aside. "Fine, but I'm still charging you for the door." Heather Sarpak had a simple life in the quiet town of Oak Haven. She ran Sweet Nothings, a bakery known for its impossibly fluffy croissants and a proprietary blend of cinnamon that somehow made people feel fiercely protective of their loved ones. She liked her quiet life. She liked her regulars, like old Mrs. Gable, who always bought 2 bear claws, and Tilda Benisova, the aloof librarian who only spoke in hushed whispers and favored the dark chocolate tarts. She didn't like the new guy. He had walked in 3 days ago smelling like pine needles, ozone, and a dangerous kind of power. Luke Prado. He didn't introduce himself as the Alpha King, of course. He called himself a consultant. But Heather had known what he was the moment the bell above her door jingled. His aura was suffocating, a heavy blanket of dominance that made the hair on her arms stand up. "A black coffee," he had said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate in her chest. "We don't just sell coffee," Heather had replied, wiping down the counter. "This is a bakery." "Just the coffee?" He had sat in the corner booth for 3 days, watching the street, watching her. It was unnerving. She knew Oak Haven was neutral territory, a place where the supernatural factions supposedly played nice. But an Alpha King didn't just hang around a bakery for the ambiance. On the 4th night, the storm hit. It was a sudden, violent squall that knocked out the power before the sun even set. Heather was in the back, checking the proofing drawers by the light of a battery-powered lantern when she heard the crash. It wasn't thunder, it was glass. She grabbed the nearest heavy object, a cast-iron skillet she used for specialized flatbreads, and crept toward the front of the shop. The scene in the darkness was chaotic. Shadows moved with unnatural speed. She smelled blood, sharp and metallic, cutting through the scent of vanilla and yeast. A body slammed into the display case, shattering the glass. It was Luke. He groaned, struggling to rise, a dark stain spreading across his tailored shirt. Standing over him were 3 figures. They moved with a fluidity that was definitely not human. Werewolves, but not Luke's. These smelled wrong, sour, metallic, rogue pack. "The king falls," one of them sneered, stepping forward. He held a gun. The metallic glint in the lantern light told Heather everything she needed to know. "Silver bullets." Luke growled, a sound that made Heather's bones vibrate, but he was too slow, too wounded. The rogue raised the gun. Heather didn't think. She reacted. She threw the skillet. It was a perfect spinning throw that caught the rogue squarely in the side of the head. He went down hard, the gun clattering across the floor. The other 2 turned to her, their eyes flashing yellow in the dim light. "Stupid human," one snarled. "I'm really tired of people calling me that," Heather muttered. She stepped out from the shadows. The nearest rogue lunged. She didn't flinch. She simply sidestepped, her hand snapping out to grab his wrist. With a sharp, precise twist, she heard the bone crack. He howled, dropping to his knees. The 3rd rogue hesitated, staring at her in confusion. Humans didn't move like that. Humans didn't break werewolf bones with a flick of the wrist. He went for the gun. Heather moved faster. She slid across the floor, kicking the weapon out of reach. The rogue tackled her, and they went down in a tangle of limbs and teeth. He was strong, immensely strong, but she was fluid. She slipped out of his hold, bringing her knee up hard into his chest. He gasped, rolling away. Heather scrambled to her feet, grabbing the rogue who had the gun. She didn't use a weapon. She used her hands. As he fired a wild shot, she slapped the barrel away, her palm connecting with the silver bullet as it left the chamber. The bullet shattered. It didn't ricochet. It didn't penetrate. It pulverized against her skin, exploding into a cloud of silver dust. Silence fell over the bakery, broken only by the sound of the rain drumming against the roof and Luke's ragged breathing. The remaining rogues stared at her, terrified. Then they bolted, scrambling out the broken window and disappearing into the storm. Heather stood there for a moment, wiping silver dust from her hands. She turned to Luke, who was staring at her with wide, incredulous eyes. "I told you, Luke," she said, her voice shaking slightly, though her grip on the iron skillet she'd retrieved did not. "I'm just a baker." "Humans," he rasped, coughing up blood, "don't shatter silver with their bare hands, Heather." Bakery. The door to the bakery splintered inward completely, the wind howling through the gap. Heather sighed, tossing the skillet aside. "Fine, but I'm still charging you for the door." Luke Prado, Alpha of the Northern Territories, was not a man accustomed to being vulnerable. He was a predator, a leader, a king. Yet, here he was, propped up against a flour bin in the back room of a bakery, bleeding onto the pristine white tiles, while a woman who smelled like sugar and spice methodically cleaned his wounds. He watched her hands. They were small, deft, and remarkably steady. There were no burns on her palms, no signs of the silver she had just pulverized. "What are you?" he asked, his voice low, testing the edges of the pain in his side. Heather didn't look up. She was focused on threading a needle with some sort of thick, dark thread. "I told you, I'm a baker. Bakers don't break werewolf bones. They don't shatter silver. Maybe you're just hanging out with the wrong bakers." She plunged the needle into his skin. Luke grunted, his jaw clenching. It wasn't the pain of the stitch. It was the sting of the thread. Wolfsbane?" "And comfrey," she corrected. "It'll slow the healing so the silver doesn't trap itself inside, and the comfrey helps the tissue knit cleanly. Unless you prefer an infection." He glared at her. "You know a lot about werewolf anatomy." "I read." She tied off the stitch and sat back, wiping a smudge of flour from her cheek. In the harsh light of the lantern, she looked exhaustingly normal. Brown hair pulled back in a messy bun, flour-dusted apron, tired eyes. "Espen Renard," Luke said suddenly. Heather froze just for a fraction of a second, but Luke saw it. His wolf senses were dull, but not that dull. "Who?" she asked, turning to put away the medical supplies. "The rogue who tried to shoot me, the one you disarmed, Espen Renard. He used to be part of the Southern Pack before he went feral. Why did he hesitate when he looked at you?" Heather sighed, turning back to face him. "Because he recognized me, and because he knows what happens when you make me angry." "Which brings me back to my first question," Luke pressed, shifting painfully. "What are you?" "I'm complicated," she said simply, "and you need to leave. Oakhaven is neutral territory, but if they know you're here, weak, they'll come back." "They? Whoever hired Espen? Rogues don't usually organize hits on Alpha Kings unless there's a serious payday involved." Luke knew she was right. He had come to Oakhaven following a rumor, a whisper of a conspiracy within his own ranks. Radka Hoffman, his second-in-command, had warned him it was a trap. He should have listened. "I can't move," he admitted, the words tasting like ash. "The silver, it was coated in something that's blocking my healing factor." Heather's expression darkened. She stepped closer, kneeling beside him, and examined the wound again. Her fingers lightly traced the edges of the stitched skin. Luke felt a strange jolt, a spark of energy that had nothing to do with pain. "Nightshade," she murmured, pulling her hand back quickly. "And something else. Something old." She stood up, pacing the small room. The lantern light threw her shadow against the bags of flour, making her look larger, more imposing. "Fine," she said finally, stopping in front of him. "You can stay here, in the basement, but you stay quiet and you don't break anything else." "Thank you," Luke said, meaning it. "Don't thank me yet," Heather warned, turning toward the stairs. "My basement is where I keep the really dangerous stuff." Luke watched her go, the scent of vanilla and the lingering crackle of her strange power filling the room. He had come to Oakhaven looking for a traitor. Instead, he had found something far more dangerous. A mystery wrapped in an apron. The basement of Sweet Nothings was nothing like the flour-dusted, warmly lit haven above. As Luke carefully navigated the creaking wooden stairs, his heightened senses were assaulted not by yeast and butter, but by the heavy electric scent of ozone, ancient dust, and something sharply metallic. It wasn't a storage room, it was a sanctuary or a bunker. The walls were lined with floor-to-ceiling shelves, groaning under the weight of leather-bound grimoires, brittle scrolls housed in glass tubes, and modern, thick-spined dissertations on cryptozoological biology. In the center of the room sat a massive oak table, scarred by burn marks and chemical spills, scattered with brass scales, mortar and pestles, and clusters of raw, unpolished quartz that seemed to pulse with an inner, terrestrial light. Make yourself comfortable, Heather instructed, gesturing to a sturdy iron-framed cot tucked in the far corner. It was surprisingly plush, dressed in crisp white linens that smelled of lavender. But don't touch anything, especially that blue glowing jar. Luke practically collapsed onto the cot, a ragged groan tearing from his throat. His entire left side felt as though it were submerged in boiling acid. He forced one golden eye open to glare at the shelf she had pointed to. Sitting between a pickled hydra head and a stack of silver ingots was a mason jar. Inside, a swirling vortex of cobalt blue smoke battered against the glass, occasionally manifesting tiny clawed hands and a face contorted in miniature fury. "What's in the jar?" he rasped, his wolf bristling in response to the demonic energy radiating from the glass. "A minor imp," Heather said casually, rolling up her sleeves. "Caught it trying to rot my sourdough starter last week. Nasty little parasites. They feed on fermentation." Luke stared at her, trying to reconcile the image of the woman who baked bear claws with the woman trapping demons in canning jars. "You're serious." "Deadly," she replied without a hint of a smile. She walked over to a heavy bookshelf, her fingers trailing over the spines until she pulled down a massive tome bound in what looked suspiciously like dragon scale. She dropped it onto the oak table with a resounding thud. For the next 2 days, Luke existed in a haze of fever and pain, essentially a captive in this underground library of shadows. The poison in his system was relentless. Normally, an alpha's healing factor would expel foreign toxins within hours. But this was different. It felt like cold iron vines wrapping around his heart. Heather came down every few hours. She would change his bandages with agonizing precision, feed him bowls of a rich, hearty stew that tasted vaguely of herbs he couldn't identify, and completely ignore his probing questions. "The silver bullet was just a delivery system," she explained on the second evening, grinding dried roots in a stone mortar. The blue jar imp chattered angrily in the background. "The nightshade caused the initial paralysis, but that's fading. It's the secondary compound that's killing you." Luke gritted his teeth as she pressed a fresh, stinging poultice to his side. "And what is it?" "Basilisk venom," she said, her tone clinical, "mixed with crushed, weaponized moonstone. The moonstone acts as an anchor, binding the venom to your lupine DNA, effectively turning your own healing factor against you. Every time your body tries to close the wound, the venom eats the new cells. It's a very expensive, very specific assassination cocktail." Luke's golden eyes narrowed. Radka. Only someone in his inner circle would have the resources to procure basilisk venom. On the afternoon of the third day, the delicate wards Heather had placed on the basement door chimed with a soft, melodic trill. Upstairs, the heavy brass bell above the bakery entrance jingled. Luke tensed on the cot. His wolf, despite being starved and poisoned, clawed at the surface of his mind, demanding to protect its territory. He strained his ears. Footsteps above. 2 sets. "Heather, darling." "2 bear claws, please, and perhaps a loaf of the rye?" The voice was trembling, nervous. Justina Little, the teenage girl who worked at the local florist. "Of course, Justina. Coming right up." Heather's voice floated down, calm and warm. Then, a sudden drastic drop in ambient temperature. Even in the basement, Luke saw his breath plume into white mist. The blue imp in the jar shrieked and went perfectly still, hiding at the bottom of the glass. A third voice spoke. It was a hushed, grating whisper that sounded like dead leaves dragging across a tombstone. "And the dark chocolate tart, if you have one. Tilda Benisova, the librarian." Luke remembered her from his stakeout, a mousy, unassuming woman in oversized cardigans. "I'll have to check the back for the tart, Tilda," Heather said smoothly. "Justina, honey, why don't you take the rye on the house today? Go on home. It looks like it might snow." There was a frantic scuffling of shoes, the chime of the doorbell, and then silence. Justina was gone. "You always were too soft on the humans, Heather," Tilda hissed. The whisper was gone, replaced by a wet clicking sound. "I have the tart, Tilda." Heather's voice was no longer warm. It was flat, hard as granite. "But I think you're looking for something else, something you lost." "Where is he?" Luke couldn't wait any longer. The air in the basement was thick with a cloying, rotting stench that overpowered the ozone, the smell of a Wendigo. Pushing past the agonizing fire in his ribs, he swung his legs off the cot. Every step up the wooden stairs threatened to tear his side open, but he forced himself upward, pressing his eye to the crack in the basement door. The bakery was transformed. Frost covered the pastry cases, dulling the glass. The air was thick with freezing mist. Standing in the center of the room was Tilda, but she was rapidly shedding her human guise. Her cardigan tore as her spine elongated, pale, translucent skin stretching drum-tight over protruding, jagged bones. Her jaw unhinged, revealing rows of needle-sharp, blood-stained teeth, and her eyes rolled back to solid, milky white. "Espen failed," the Wendigo gurgled, taking a step toward the counter. "But the king is hurt. We tracked his blood to your door. Baldwin wants his head, and I want his marrow." Heather stood behind the counter, perfectly still. She didn't reach for the iron skillet today. Instead, she picked up a simple wooden rolling pin. "I'm sorry, Tilda. We're out of dark chocolate tarts, and I'm fresh out of patience." Tilda lunged. A Wendigo was a creature of pure, insatiable famine. She moved faster than a werewolf, a blur of elongated limbs and snapping jaws, aiming straight for Heather's throat. Luke tried to shove the door open, to roar, but his body betrayed him. He collapsed against the wood. But Heather didn't need his help. She didn't retreat. She stepped into the Wendigo's guard. Using the rolling pin not as a club, but as a lever, she caught Tilda under her unhinged jaw and wrenched upward with sickening force. Bone cracked like a gunshot. Tilda shrieked, a sound that shattered the remaining intact windows of the bakery, and stumbled backward, black ichor dripping from her chin. Heather didn't press the physical attack. She dropped the rolling pin and slammed both palms flat against the wooden countertop. The building groaned. The flour that had settled on the floors and counters suddenly rose into the air, suspended by an invisible, crackling static. The quartz stones Luke had seen in the basement began to hum, a deep, vibratory sound that rattled Luke's teeth in his skull. "You tracked him here," Heather said, and her voice was no longer just a sound. It was a physical weight pressing down on the room. "But you didn't think about what here is, did you, Tilda? You thought this was just a bakery." Tilda hissed, trying to charge again, but the air itself seemed to solidify around her. The floorboards beneath the creature's clawed feet splintered as an immense gravitational pressure bore down on her. "It's a sanctuary," Heather commanded, her brown eyes flashing with a terrifying, ancient amber light. "And you broke the rules of Oakhaven. You are just a freak," Tilda spat, struggling against the invisible weight. "I am Heather Sarpak," she stated, drawing herself up. The air pressure in the room dropped so violently Luke's ears popped. "Warden of Oakhaven, protector of the ley lines, and you have overstayed your welcome." Heather thrust one hand forward. A shockwave of pure kinetic earth magic erupted from her palm. It wasn't a spell. It was the raw, unbridled force of the ley line beneath the town rising to her call. The force slammed into Tilda's chest. The Wendigo didn't just fly backward, she was launched like a cannonball, blasting entirely through the heavy double doors of the bakery, tearing the doorframe from the brick and skipping across the asphalt street outside before crashing into a parked car. Silence rushed back into the bakery, broken only by the howling of the winter wind through the destroyed entrance. Heather stood breathing heavily, the amber light slowly fading from her eyes as the suspended flour drifted gently back to the floor like snow. She wiped her hands on her apron, turned, and saw Luke collapsed in the basement doorway, staring at her with unabashed awe. "Warden," he breathed, the word heavy on his tongue. It wasn't a myth. The Wardens were the ancient primordial peacekeepers of the earth, beings with power that dwarfed alphas and covens alike. Surprise," Heather said dryly, stepping over a pile of shattered glass. "Now go back downstairs before you bleed on my clean floors." The revelation changed everything. Luke wasn't just hiding with a powerful baker. He was under the protection of a warden. It explained the strength, the lack of a recognizable scent, the ability to casually handle a minor demon. "Why hide?" Luke asked her later that evening as she worked on a complex poultice. "With your power, you could rule." Heather snorted. "Rule? Have you met people? People are exhausting. I like baking. It's predictable. Yeast plus sugar plus warmth equals bread. It makes sense. Pack politics, coven wars. It's all just a mess. A mess that just crashed through your front door. Only because you dragged it here," she pointed out, applying the poultice to his side. It burned, then immediately cooled, drawing out the lingering poison. Baldwin is making a move, Luke said, his mind racing. He hired Espen. He used Tilda. He's trying to take the Northern Territories while I'm weak. Which means someone told him you were coming here, Heather said, meeting his eyes. Someone in your inner circle. Luke nodded grimly. Radka. She was the only one who knew I was coming to Oakhaven. You're second in command. That hurts. She's ambitious, but she's also cautious. She wouldn't make a move unless she was sure she could win. She thought you'd be dead by now, Heather reasoned. The poison on the bullet, it's a rare mixture. Basilisk venom and crushed moonstone. It suppresses regeneration and eventually stops the heart. Tilda must have supplied it. Wendigos have a knack for acquiring nasty things. Can you cure it? I am curing it, but it takes time. Time you might not have. Heather stood up, wiping her hands on a towel. If Radka thinks you're dead, she'll move to consolidate power. She'll call a pack council. And challenge for the alpha position, Luke finished. I have to get back. You can barely walk up the stairs, let alone fight a challenger, Heather said bluntly. Then I need you to come with me. Heather laughed. It was a genuine bright sound that startled him. Me? Go to a werewolf pack council? No thank you, I have croissants to laminate? Heather, please, you're a warden. Your presence alone would stop Radka in her tracks. Wardens are neutral, Luke. We don't interfere in pack politics. My job is to protect Oakhaven. And what happens to Oakhaven when Baldwin and Radka form an alliance? They won't respect your neutrality. They'll see this town as a strategic asset. You'll be fighting off rogues and wendigos every day. Heather stopped laughing. She looked around her basement, her sanctuary. He could see the conflict in her eyes, the desire for a quiet life warring with the reality of the threat. Fine, she said finally, but I'm charging you triple my usual consulting fee. And if anyone messes with my bakery while I'm gone, I'm holding you personally responsible. Luke smiled, a real smile that reached his golden eyes. Deal. The journey to the Northern Pack headquarters took 2 days. Luke was healing, the basilisk venom slowly purging from his system thanks to Heather's poultices, but he was still weak. Heather drove his SUV, complaining about the leather seats and the lack of decent radio stations. Who listens to this much brooding rock music? She muttered, changing the station again. It focuses me, Luke replied from the passenger seat. They arrived at the pack compound just as the sun was setting. It was a sprawling estate hidden deep in the forest, surrounded by heavy security. As they pulled up to the gates, 2 guards stepped out, their expressions turning from professional to shocked as they recognized Luke. Alpha, one of them gasped. We were told you were dead. Not yet, Adela, Luke said, rolling down the window. Open the gates. Adela hesitated. Alpha, Radka has called the council. She's taking the oath tonight. Luke's eyes flashed gold. Open the gates. They drove through, the tension thick in the air. Heather parked near the main lodge. The sounds of a large gathering, voices, the clinking of glasses, the low thrum of excitement spilled out into the cool evening air. Showtime, Heather said, grabbing her bag. They walked into the main hall. It was packed. Hundreds of wolves stood around a raised dais where Radka Hoffman stood, looking regal and triumphant. Beside her stood Baldwin, the Western alpha, looking smug. And so, Radka was projecting her voice over the crowd, with a heavy heart, I accept this burden. Luke Prado was a strong leader, but he was foolish. He left us vulnerable. I wouldn't say foolish, Luke's voice rang out, cutting through the silence like a knife. Just betrayed. The crowd parted as Luke and Heather walked down the center aisle. Gasps rippled through the room. Radka's face went pale, her eyes darting to Baldwin, who looked furious. Luke, Radka stammered, you're alive. No thanks to you, Radka, Luke growled, his wolf rising, demanding dominance. Even weakened, his aura was formidable. He stepped onto the dais, ignoring Baldwin, and locked eyes with his former second. You conspired with an enemy alpha. You hired a rogue to kill me. You are a traitor. Radka recovered quickly, her ambition overriding her shock. You are weak, Luke. You come in here, barely standing, and accuse me? I challenge you for the right to lead. Pfft. A murmur went through the crowd. By pack law, a challenge had to be accepted. He doesn't have to accept, Heather said, stepping forward. Radka sneered. And who is this, your human pet? Heather didn't react to the insult. She simply let her power flare. It wasn't the aggressive, dominating aura of an alpha. It was the ancient, terrifying weight of the earth itself. The air pressure in the room dropped, the lights flickered. Several wolves whined, dropping to their knees involuntarily. "I am Heather Sarpak, Warden of the Ley Lines," she announced, her voice echoing unnaturally in the large hall. "And I declare this challenge void. Radka Hoffman broke the ancient treaties by using forbidden poisons, basilisk venom and moonstone, on neutral ground. She is not fit to challenge. She is fit only for judgment." Baldwin bristled. "Wardens don't interfere in pack business." "I am interfering in a breach of treaty, Baldwin," Heather snapped, turning her power toward him. He stumbled back, looking shaken. "And if you don't leave my territory, and the north is my territory by right of the ley lines, I will bury you beneath it." Baldwin didn't argue. He turned and fled, abandoning Radka. Radka lunged at Luke in a desperate final attempt, but Luke was ready. He caught her throat, pinning her to the floor. "You're done, Radka," he growled. The rebellion was over before it truly began. The aftermath was messy but swift. Radka was banished, her loyalists fleeing or swearing fealty back to Luke. It took weeks for Luke to fully recover, and during that time, Heather stayed. She reorganized his kitchen, much to the dismay of the pack chefs, and taught them how to properly proof bread. She was different here, more relaxed, less guarded. She still smelled like vanilla, but now it was mixed with the scent of pine and Luke's own scent. One evening, they were sitting on the porch of the main lodge, watching the sun set over the forest. "You could stay, you know," Luke said quietly, not looking at her. "And do what?" Heather asked, sipping a cup of tea. "Become the pack baker? I think Cesare would poison my flour." Cesare Goodwin was the head chef, a proud, temperamental wolf who hated Heather's interference. "You could be more than that." Luke turned to her, his golden eyes intense. "You could be mine." Marka Heather paused, the teacup halfway to her lips. She looked at him, really looked at him. He wasn't just the Alpha King anymore. He was the man who had let her order him around, who had trusted her with his life, who ate her experimental pastries without complaint. "I'm a warden, Luke. My place is Oakhaven." "Oakhaven is an hour away," he countered. "And I have very fast cars." He reached out, his hand covering hers. His skin was warm, his grip strong but gentle. "I thought you were just a human," he confessed, a small smile playing on his lips. "A very brave, very strange human." "And I thought you were just an arrogant jerk who wanted a black coffee," she replied, a smile tugging at her own lips. "We were both wrong." He leaned in, the distance between them closing. Heather didn't pull away. When his lips met hers, it wasn't a clash of power, but a blending. It tasted like ozone and pine, vanilla and strength. It felt like coming home. They broke apart slowly, the air between them still crackling with energy. "So," Luke murmured, his forehead resting against hers, "does this mean I get free croissants for life?" Heather laughed, the sound echoing across the quiet porch. "Don't push your luck, Alpha, but I might consider a discount. It's a story about recognizing the hidden strengths in others and the unexpected places we find our sanctuary." Heather, disguised by her apron and flower, proves that extraordinary power often resides in the most unassuming packages. Luke learns that true leadership involves vulnerability and trusting those outside your usual circle. In real life, we often encounter people we underestimate based on their roles or appearances. This story reminds us to look beyond the surface, to appreciate the quiet resilience of the bakers in our lives. We all have hidden depths, our own versions of Warden magic, waiting for the right moment to emerge. If you enjoyed Heather and Luke's journey, please like, share, and subscribe for more tales of unexpected magic and romance. Let me know in the comments what hidden talents you possess.